My name is Shelley Glica, and I'd like to welcome you to the virtual opening of Vision 2020 Women's Work Niagara. This art exhibition is curated and hosted by Deborah Jackson in partnership with the Niagara Falls Art Gallery and Niagara Falls Arts and Culture, supported by a grant from the Niagara Falls Cultural Development Fund. I would like to begin by acknowledging Niagara Falls as a sacred gathering place for many Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. This land is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. I wish to recognize the long history of First Nations and Métis peoples in Ontario and show my respect to them. You might be wondering why I'm speaking to you from my front porch on such a blustery fall day. Dogs barking, cars driving by, airplanes, helicopters. You're getting the full porch experience. It is because I believe that front porches are an inherent part of my work to build community in Niagara Falls. Social connections are integral to the human experience. Front porches in historic neighborhoods foster interconnectedness with others in the neighborhood. The same can be said about garages in newer, more suburban neighborhoods. Often the garage is a gathering place for people on the street in the same way a porch would be. They serve the same purpose when used in this context. In many ways, garages are the modern front porch. They often project from the facade of the house and when used to entertain friends and neighbors become a semi-public place, much like the traditional use of a front porch. Today I'd like to talk to you about building community through art, and so I'll share some of my experiences. Back in 2015, I first heard of a small-scale community music festival called Porchfest. My interests have long included arts, culture, heritage, and community. And I have experience in event planning. I thought I'd give it a go and organize one here in Niagara Falls. What interested me most about this idea was the melding of historic neighborhoods full of houses with front porches that could accommodate musicians on them. I thought it was brilliant to integrate the arts into the community by creating places and spaces for performances directly in our neighborhoods. After much planning, I hosted the first successful Porchfest in Niagara Falls on a lovely sunny July day in 2016. This was a free public event supported by the city through a grant from the Niagara Falls Cultural Development Fund. A few hundred people wandered from porch to porch in the downtown area, enjoying free live music, artists who were painting and drawing, people engaging with each other, meeting neighbors and friends, old and new. It was a beautiful day for people to connect and be present, so I decided to do it all again the next year in 2017. There's considerable support from the local downtown community. Many merchants donated to the raffles we held, Queen Street bars hosted after parties, and local businesses helped cover some of the costs of hosting Porchfest. I'm so grateful to all of them for believing that together we could create an event with mutual benefits to the community and local businesses. I wanted to find a way to continue the feeling of Porchfest, to continue building those community connections, and so Stories from the Porch was born. It started as a bit of a test project in the late summer of 2016. I hosted several weekly events on my own front porch in August and September of that year. Stories from the Porch involves a series of speakers on a diverse range of topics, with the public invited to bring a chair and hang out on my lawn for a few hours. It became quickly apparent that Stories from the Porch had a lot of potential, and so planning began for the following year. The concept is simple. Bring the arts to people in a non-traditional space and build community by encouraging social interactions and participation. Stories from the Porch has hosted a wide range of speakers and topics, both fun and serious, many locally focused and some more broad. 2020 marked the 5th season for the series, which I find quite remarkable and quite wonderful. There's something enduring about gathering in a very casual setting to engage in a typically more formal event. The topics are always left up to the speakers and have ranged from local history to drag queen story time. I know that I have learned a great many things from the people who have graced my porch in the last 5 years, and I hope others have too. It can be simultaneously entertaining and educational while building enduring relationships among the attendees. I have met and developed friendships with a number of people through Stories from the Porch. This is how I met Deborah. There are a number of regulars as well as people who come to hear a particular speaker or topic. It is something I look forward to hosting each week in the summer. After the speaker finishes and questions have been answered, refreshments are served and social time commences. We certainly missed the social component this past summer as we encouraged people to watch from home online and only had a few people physically distanced on the lawn each week. As COVID-19 necessitated a change to a mostly virtual format this year, I wondered if the original intent, which is to facilitate in-person socialization and community building, would be lost. Early on, one of the goals of my projects was to physically bring people together, as for some time we've been moving toward more social media and less social gatherings. Perhaps this fear was unfounded, as Stories had a much wider reach in its virtual incarnation, and still managed to remain a way that we could remain connected in these ever-changing pandemic times. Though we couldn't share cookies and coffee on the lawn, we could via the internet. It became a weekly online meeting place when we weren't able to meet in person. I think it's been quite amazing the ways in which people have innovatively brought art, music, and storytelling to us at home. So why did I start all of this in the first place? Let me take you back to my grandpa's porch in the 1970s. I grew up in North Tonawanda, New York, and my grandpa lived on the Avenues, as it was called, and is still called. This was a neighborhood with a high population of Polish immigrants, and we were no exception. My great-grandparents immigrated to the United States at the turn of the 20th century. It was a typical working-class neighborhood. My grandpa was employed at the Wurlitzer factory building the famous Wurlitzer organs and jukeboxes. He had retired by the time I came along and had begun to spend much of his time sitting on the front porch, watching the world go by and chatting with the neighbors. This is where my love of the front porch began. It's one of the places I learned about being an active participant in my community. I played on this porch. I listened on this porch. Sometimes the conversations were in Polish, so I didn't really understand what they were saying, but I suspect this was often by design. I learned about the world and how to connect with people. When my grandpa got older and it was time to sell the house, he moved in with my aunt in a suburban ranch, and she promptly built him a front porch on which to sit and enjoy the rest of his days. She still lives there and has taken over his porch duties. I guess it's a duty I also inherited. Growing up, I lived with my mom and my other set of grandparents at the opposite end of my small city. This grandpa had a hobby farm right there in our neighborhood that he farmed with my great uncle who lived next door. There were a few acres behind the house, and they sold what they grew at the fruit stand on the corner of our property. The house was built by my grandparents in 1956, and it didn't have a front porch because they had fallen out of fashion by then. It didn't matter. The fruit stand became my place to socialize as a child at home. I learned to love gardening and understood the importance from an early age of connecting with the community through our shared love of my grandpa's produce. The reason people came to the stand, which is what we always called it, was twofold. They came for the fruits and vegetables, but they also came to chat with my grandpa and uncle and catch up with my grandma and aunt. It was a place where people learned the goings-on of the neighborhood and of the city. The stand offered more than just food, it offered human connection. So, although there wasn't a porch to sit on and watch the world go by, there was the stand to hang out at. Both my grandpa on the Avenues and my grandparents with the stand taught me about being active in my neighborhood and the importance of building community right where we were. There's a sense of nostalgia for me associated with the front porch. They have both a utilitarian feature to escape the heat of the house while doing some chores, and recreation in the evening on the rocker to feel the cool breezes. They have also served as an aesthetic feature of houses and represent a semi-private space, the transition from the public space of the sidewalk to the private indoor space of the house. I spend every minute I can on mine. I work, read, converse with my neighbors, friends, and strangers from it and on it. When my partner Will and I were looking to buy a home, we had a list of must-haves, as everyone does, a certain number of bedrooms and bathrooms, a particular configuration of space, and so on. Our list included a front porch in a neighborhood of houses with front porches, because I knew front porch communities had the potential for the kind of connection I remember from my childhood. So we bought a big old house that needed too much work and set about creating those connections. We live on a corner urban lot, and as such, we have no real backyard, but a rather generous side yard. Initially, we talked of fencing it in, but there was no real need as our children were getting older. The first summer, we hosted a party and invited all the neighbors. In hindsight, this was my first step in attempting to build community in my neighborhood, though I wasn't truly aware of that at the time. We did this year after year, and it wasn't long before our yard became regarded by us as more of a semi-public space, and so the projects started coming shortly after that. My ideas have been heavily influenced by Jane Jacobs. If you aren't familiar with her, Jane Jacobs was a pioneer in the field of urban planning, although she herself was not an urban planner. Jane was a critic of the urban renewal that was happening around the US and Canada at the time in the 1960s, and her focus was on creating livable cities that considered the people who lived there. This approach to urban planning was in complete opposition to the ideas of the time, which were far more focused on the automobile and the suburbs than on walkability and human-scale architecture in cities. Jane focused on the natural tendencies of people occupying the spaces where they lived, instead of creating artificial spaces where people were expected to congregate, but in reality were avoided. The emphasis on the importance of how people occupy places and spaces has held a long fascination for me. Attempts at artificially creating community often end up failing because there's no natural gravitation towards them. It's rather easy to enhance an area that already has some level of existing attraction, which very often happens organically as more and more people see the intrinsic value in a place. It's these areas that become thriving community spaces through a blend of good timing, invested stakeholders, and an interested public that enjoys the feelings they derive from participation in those spaces. Planning and hosting community events has brought me considerable joy. Although at times stressful, the rewards of a successful event are far-reaching. I have always believed in the power of volunteerism and that you receive in abundance far more than you give. I feel fortunate that my ideas have been well received in Niagara Falls. Taking a concept and turning it into a reality is something all artists can relate to. At times it can be difficult and perhaps feel impossible, but once you've turned the corner, all roads lead to the destination. Sometimes it feels quite serendipitous. Everything works out in the end. It isn't always the way we hoped or planned, but it works out. If it hasn't worked out one way or another, it's not the end. Keep going. Although it's not always easy to keep moving ahead, and I think most of us question at one point or another if we're doing the right thing, whether it still holds value and meaning to us. When our oldest daughter died in 2016, I wondered if it was all just too much to continue working on these projects. It was then that I realized how important they were to me personally, and how much benefit I derived from connecting with others. Porchfest and Stories from the Porch both happened again in 2017. The community support I received that year was especially profound. And looking forward, I decided to return to school in 2018. Although I've continued to host Stories from the Porch in subsequent years, Porchfest as a music festival has taken a backseat out of necessity. It would be lovely to resurrect it one day. In its place this year, I brought music back to the porch in a series of smaller, single porch, one afternoon events called Sundays on the Porch. It was a vastly different experience for me as I was able to stay in one location and enjoy the music in the entire time, as opposed to during my Porchfest experience when I was running around managing porches. Also a great experience, but definitely a little different to actually be able to sit and really truly enjoy a musician's set. As I reflect on the projects I've participated in and those yet to come, I consider the importance of women's work in facilitating arts and culture. As I mentioned, I returned to university and am currently studying midwifery. Midwife translates to with women. To me, this means that women are there to support one another, to provide encouragement, especially when feeling discouraged, to facilitate the emerging of new life. This concept readily applies to art as well. I've been fortunate to have the support of so many influential, brilliant, talented women in the course of my life. Historically, women's work has been undervalued and underappreciated. Projects such as Vision 2020, Women's Work Niagara, showcase the importance of women's contribution to the world. It's crucial that we continue to support and uplift one another. The arts enhance our lives. I think this has become all the more obvious since the pandemic began back in March. The joy of being surrounded by beautiful and intriguing works of art, listening to a musician or a storyteller or a poet are vital to the human experience. Vision 2020 focuses on the stories told by women through art. Being involved in arts and culture with the city has helped me evolve as a person. I like to think of myself as an outgoing introvert. I truly enjoy the social aspects of the local arts and culture community and look forward to the day when we can all safely reconnect in public. Until such time, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to connect virtually with so many wonderful, talented folks. Special thanks to Deborah Jackson for curating this incredible exhibition of local women's talent, the Niagara Falls Art Gallery, and the City of Niagara Falls Cultural Development Fund for supporting this endeavor. Special thanks to Deborah as well for asking me to speak to you today. I hope you stay well. Take care.